Have you ever felt like you're just speaking a different language than everyone else around you? Like your thoughts run deeper, your questions stretch further, and your curiosity just doesn't have boundaries? If so, you're not alone, and this episode is for you. I have always been that person, the one with the mind that never stops racing, always analyzing, always seeking deeper meaning. While everyone else was chatting about the latest gossip or TV shows, I was pondering the meaning of life or the nature of reality, you name it. It felt like I was constantly on the outside looking in, just watching other people engage in small talk while I was silently screaming for something more profound. Talk about lonely. I can't count the times that I tried to steer the conversation towards something juicy, only to get blank stares or a quick change of subject. This whole too much, too intense vibe, I was always too much and too intense. But that sent me on some wild rides. For years, I chased extremes, anything to match the intensity in my head. I found myself drawn to risky behaviors and altered states of consciousness. If it made you feel something, I probably tried it. Looking back, I realized I was just kind of desperate to feel understood, to find a place where the depth of my thoughts and feelings wasn't judged or dismissed. And ironically, it was usually in these altered states, whether through drugs or skydiving, that I found the connections that I really craved. Because when other people were intoxicated or riding the high of some extreme experience, suddenly everyone was a philosopher. So it felt like the floodgates opened and we could finally have those deep, meaningful conversations that I just always wanted. But here's the thing, and this took me years to realize, but it wasn't just about others letting their guards down. In those moments, I was letting go a little more too. All that fear of being judged that had always held me back just melted away. I could finally express myself fully without worrying about being seen as weird or too intense, and that was liberating. Well, as I've gotten older, I've started to see this intensity differently. The depth of thought and feeling isn't something to be ashamed of or to hide. It's a gift. Sure, it comes with its own set of challenges, but learning to navigate the world as a deep thinker or a sensitive soul, that's the real adventure, and it's the one that I'm still very much on, which is why I'm so pumped about today's episode. We have Cory joining us, author, podcaster, and a kindred spirit in the world of profound conversations. When we first connected, it was one of those rare, did we just become best friends moment? You know, the kind, that instant connection that feels like striking gold, especially for those of us who feel misunderstood usually. Well, what's wild is that just last week, Charles Duhigg and I were talking about being super communicators and how to reach those deep, meaningful conversations that we all crave. But little did I know that this very interview would turn into the exact type of conversation we were discussing. Just raw, honest, delving into the depths of human experience. So we're going to dig into all of the perks and pitfalls of being a deep thinker in a world that usually values small talk over soul talk. We'll talk about how to own your unique perspective, how to connect authentically with other people without dimming your light, how to find that sweet spot between your rich inner world and the sometimes kind of shallow reality that we all are normally in. So whether you're the one who's always been labeled too intense, or you're just curious about how these overthinking minds work, this conversation is going to be fascinating, maybe even life-changing. So 3 key things we will learn are how to turn negative thoughts into moments of curiosity and wonder, how to rediscover forgotten parts of yourself, and the dual nature of your deepest scars. Before we go deep today, I want to give you a little gift, and I want to give it to you every single day. It's called the Morning Mind Love. I know how life can be. You're all fired up after an inspiring episode, and then a new day or a new challenge comes at you, and it's just hard to keep up that energy. Well, the Morning Mind Love is kind of like an oracle from your higher self to help you start each day with a positive focus. Plus, when you sign up, you get 2 free gifts, a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of journaling prompts to help you remember who you truly are. And it's all completely free. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up or text the word morning to 33777.
All of that hemming and hawing and chewing on yourself and frustration and outrage and anger at the culture because they don't understand your creativity and why aren't you as successful as this person and why can't you do this or why are you doing too much of this? It's all just ego stuff. It's kind of selective outrage. It's a way to feel self-enamored and to continue to be self-enamored, which is what the ego loves, is you can be a victim and also an expert of judgment at the same time. And that's a really crafty and dangerous place to live in. That's why we look at, the outrage in politics culture. It's that exact mechanism that's happening. It's like you're basically being a bully and a victim at once. And it creates a lot of just wide open highway for the ego to just go soaring down once you start agreeing that that narrative is reality.
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
I'm really happy to be here. I've actually been a fan of yours for a while. I reached out back in 2019 trying to get you on the show, and then your people reached out to me this time. So I was like, oh, this is a full circle manifestation moment.
This is wonderful. I have no recollection of that whatsoever. I don't know how I would have missed that or we would have missed that, but I'm glad that it worked out and we're here now.
Well, I was a little budding entrepreneur back then, reaching for the stars. So I'm just glad to be here today. And I've been going through your book and I love it. I have been having a really tough week. So it was actually a good book to prepare with. And I know that you talk a lot about something that we're very familiar here, all about mindsets. Mindsets are magic, is even the name of your first chapter. What inspired you with this latest and greatest work?
Yeah, so really it was like paying attention to a lot of what the kind of cultural conversation has been in so much as in my world. Like I started watching for what type of engagement, what type of comments, what type of feedback I got anytime I put some writing out into the world. And my writing between, social media and my newsletter and whatnot reaches about 1 million people a week. And so it's a pretty good segment of the population to just kind of listen to and understand where people are at and what they're struggling with. I'm very interested in perception. I have been for my pretty much my entire life. And so the idea of like an author thinking, I know what people need versus flipping that around and being like, let me observe for a minute and see what it seems that people need. So that was really one of the things that drew me to the premise of the book and the content within is really just watching how people responded to things and what seemed to be needed. And so the biggest thing that actually was surprising to me was that everyone seems to feel as though they're on this precipice moment, that their life is fine. They're relatively happy-ish, things are going good. There's ups and downs, but they have this feeling inside of them that they could do something that they would feel would be great, like elevate some part of their life. And it doesn't have to be anything huge, but it could be something fundamental or it could be a huge goal, but they can't quite figure out how to make that change and find the pathway to that greater part of themselves in order to increase, or maybe increase isn't even the best word, but change their life in a way that they feel is possible. And so I created this map, this plan to help people start where they're at. And then ultimately, if we break apart a little bit what I was just describing, just looking deeper into it, we see that it's really an issue of being able to listen to yourself and trust what is arising, to trust the instinct, the voice that you hear, and to actually listen to it and execute, to put that into action. Because so many of us have this voice of like, oh, I want to do this, or this feels right. I love doing this. And then this other voice arises that comes up with an excuse that talks you out of it, that tells you why now isn't a good time, that tells you that you aren't worthy of doing whatever it is, or being whoever it is that you're feeling feels right to you. And so, um, if we can begin to listen to that voice more, to tune into ourselves, we can act in a way in our lives that serves our actual goals, what feels good to us, what will make us happy. And by doing that process, we start building a feedback loop of confidence, of self trust, of self belief. And what that grows into is an individual who listens to their intuition, listens to what is how they're being guided within, and then actually has the clarity, the confidence, and the patience to live that way in the future.
This is exactly what I have been focusing on in the last few months. My coaching program talks to those very people, the people who feel like they're on the brink of something or they know they're meant for something more, but they keep talking themselves out of it. And one of the things that comes up when I'm working with people, and I love that that's how you started the inspiration for the book, is you talked about how you actually started listening to what people need and finding this intersection between what you're passionate about with what people actually need and what is valuable to other people. And I think that is a part of this whole process that goes unrecognized quite often. Like we're living in a generation where people think that just because it's this passion, like that they should get paid for it. I'm thinking of a friend specifically who like really was going for art and she was just like wanted to be her most creative expressed self and her brother was giving her advice on how to actually make a business from it and she just couldn't hear it for years and years and finally when she started to find that sweet spot of what people actually wanted and where her skills could meet that, then her business took off and she could actually make a living. So I'm curious, how do you think about that line of yes, we should there's the being overdoing and people are so good at coming back to themselves in the spiritual community, but how do you find that if you don't have an audience like yours where you can ask, how do you recommend that people find that sweet spot of like, yes, I can go out and do my own thing, but it needs to be something that other people think is valuable, not just I do.
Yeah, no, I've thought about that a lot. And I continue to think about that, you know? I mean, not to get too granular here, but or perhaps maybe too existential, but if we are, people in the world trying to create things or trying to go towards some ambition, like who are we becoming along the way? And what is our real vision? And how deep are we willing to look inward and understand what our true desires are? Like, what's the real fundamental value underneath the surface level goal? And where is that coming from? And why are you being driven by that? And do you like that? Is that a good thing to be driven by? And another avenue to look at within is then we ask ourselves, like, why am I resistant to changing or evolving, I should say, what it is that I want to put into the world? Why am I attached to that? Does does changing what I'm doing to get more traction and connect with more people, does that devalue the authenticity of my creation? Or does it change it in a way where I am actually I'm really doing the same thing yet just communicating differently? So
Mm.
these are all questions that I think about and more. I mean, I just think about this constantly. I would say that the just to chunk all that out into something we can use and think about, I would consider like one has to sit down with themselves and be honest and say, okay, here's what I want to do. What are my goals for this? Really? Now, if your goal, if you want to, if this person, your friend you're talking about who is in full on art mode, just I totally love and respect that, and that's how I spent most of the 98% of my life was being in that space. Like, I grew up making avant-garde music and composing, like, experimental music. He's like, there's no money in that, right? But I did it anyway, and that's actually perhaps this I'll use that as example in just a moment. But we have to consider, like, if you're going full in on just creativity, ultimately, that act is self-indulgent, which is totally fine. It's beautiful. You're making this art for art's sake, for yourself. Incredible things come out of that. But if you, at the same time, are going, I'm just making this art without considering other people, how it's being received, what it means to others, I'm just doing it for me. And then you're also getting frustrated that you're not getting, visibility, that you're not making money from it, that you're not getting the status that you feel you deserve from it. Well, now you have an internal conflict. And that internal conflict is because you aren't being honest with what you actually want, and you're not squaring those two things. Because you can't be full on self-indulgent artist and a popular person in culture at the same time, unless you're extraordinarily lucky. And even people who are doing that at the highest level are still not in 100% unfiltered creativity mode. I'm trying to think of a good, like Yorgos Lanthimos, the film director, who made The Lobster. He made The Favorite. He made what was his new one called? Poor Things. Incredible director, one of the best, one of my favorite directors right now. Like his films somehow, and it still confuses me to this day to a degree, like they're so abstract and so dark and so hilarious and brutal and weird and absurd. And somehow he keeps getting like Oscar level, Oscar nominations and wins and funding from studios to make these films. And it's like, how is he doing that? Like, that doesn't make sense that stuff that's that cool and that art forward is getting celebrated in culture. But he's kind of one of those rare exceptions, right? So the point is to just get to the, more swiftly to the point here is like, you have to think about like, what is it that you really want? What is it that you're doing? And be honest with yourself. So if you want to be, if you do want the status, if you do want the notoriety and the money for what you're doing, you have to understand that you have to then communicate your art in a way that reaches more people, because that's where the scalability of that stuff comes from. And it doesn't mean that you have to change what you're doing. It just means that you have to figure out a way that you're communicating with your medium that connects with people in a way that you didn't understand how to do in the first place. And that the shift in that style of communication is generally where the artist feels like they're somehow being inauthentic because they're changing something about their creative style. But really, in my mind, I believe this to be true, is it's like what's really happened is, as I keep saying, it's just learning how to communicate differently. But I think that being clear with yourself of like what you want, what you actually want to do, what your real aspirations are, and what you need to meet those aspirations is where you will start to get closer to them, and ultimately you can avoid this whole lifelong conflict, and which gives rise to you know a lot of fantasies and narrative thinking and so forth about like why your stuff is or isn't successful and so on. Sorry if that was really long-winded, but this is something I've thought about a lot over the years.
No, I love long-winded responses, so feel free.
Okay.
I don't know why it took me so long to invest in good bedding. I resisted it for years, but something flipped in me about 3 years ago. And now I'm basically a pillow connoisseur. I've tried them all, and I get weirdly excited about good bedding. Because here's the thing, we spend a third of our lives in bed, and the quality of that time affects literally everything else, which is why I'm so excited to tell you about my latest obsession, Lagoon Sleep Pillows. What sets them apart is their matching system. You take a quick 2-minute quiz about your sleep style and your preferences, and then they match you with your perfect pillow. I was matched with their Otter pillow, and I am so impressed. Lately, I've just needed more support, and this seems to cradle me in all the right places. I'm also low-key obsessed with their travel pillow, which I use for way more than just travel. I actually hug it, use it as leg support, and of course, take it on trips with me. Well, the secret is in their adjustable fill. You can add or remove it to get that perfect alignment for your spine. A study even found that the right supportive pillow can improve sleep quality by 63%. And Lagoon lets you try their matched pillow for 100 nights risk-free. Free returns, no questions asked. Falling asleep has never been easier. I toss and turn less and just wake up feeling refreshed every morning. Go to lagoonsleep.com and take their awesome 2-minute sleep quiz to find your match. Use the code MIND for 15% off your first purchase. You know what's funny? We spend so much time feeding our minds, reading books, listening to podcasts, learning new things, but then we grab whatever's convenient to feed our bodies. And I get it. Life is busy, and sometimes a drive-through feels like the only option. But that's why I take Field of Greens. It's a greens powder made with whole organic fruits and vegetables. No extracts, no lab-made stuff, and just 1 scoop a day gives you simple, real nutrition. Field of Greens feeds your body with fruits and vegetables medically chosen to support your heart, vital organs, and immune system. And let me tell you something. Since I started taking it, I've noticed these little changes that show me how nutrient depleted I must have been before. Like the ridges in my nails, gone. My sleep, so much better. And my stomach just feels happy. You know that dreaded afternoon crash that has you reaching for more coffee or sugary snacks? Well, that's not happening for me anymore. When your body is actually nourished, it runs so much better. I've tried other greens powders before, but Field of Greens is genuinely different. The quality is next level and you can taste it. It's become my go-to, especially on those days when my eating isn't exactly Instagram worthy, because we all have those days, right? And here's the thing. They are so confident that you'll love it too, that they offer a 100% money back guarantee. That's how much they believe in their product. So I got you 15% off your first order and free rush shipping. Visit fieldofgreens.com and use promo code MINDLOVE. That's promo code MINDLOVE at fieldofgreens.com. Fieldofgreens.com. There was so much in that and so many little points where I'm like, yes, that. And one of them is around this idea where people get caught up in like, well, I'm not being authentic if I'm now changing this for other people. And framed like that, I can see where that perception is created. But what is authenticity then, when you really think about it? And what was your first driver? And what is your ultimate goal? All questions that you posed. And something that I've been really thinking about is this idea of absolute clarity and how often we are giving ourselves, the universe, other people mixed messages about what our goal actually is. And so a few examples of these are around money. For example, there's people that don't feel good when they're earning money by doing what they love. And just by that very nature of those visceral reactions, they're giving mixed messages. I want money, but I don't feel good about money. That's just a basic example. But then otherwise, it's like, okay, I want authenticity. I want to express my art. But where's that coming from if you're not open to even seeing, is this valuable? Do other people think of this as value? It sort of becomes an ego drive. Like, no, I can't change this because I've already chosen this. But when you really think about the nature of reality and who we really are, and that the ego is an illusion, and that we're all just one divine entity experiencing life from different perspectives, then wouldn't the goal be, well, in order to be as authentic as possible, I need to open my experience to new inputs, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I know, I totally know what you mean, and you're right, as I was hoping you were getting where the stem of your thought was gonna land where I felt it was gonna land. And you're totally right. All of that hemming and hawing and chewing on yourself and frustration and outrage and anger at the culture because they don't understand your creativity and why aren't you as successful as this person and why can't you do this or why are you doing too much of this? It's all just ego stuff. It's kind of selective outrage. It's a way to feel self-enamored and to continue to be self-enamored, which is what the ego loves. Is you can be a victim and also an expert of judgment at the same time, and that's a really crafty and dangerous place to live in. That's why we look at the outrage in politics culture. It's that exact mechanism that's happening. It's like you're basically being a bully and a victim at once, and it creates a lot of just wide open highway for the ego to just go soaring down once you start agreeing that that narrative is reality. So yeah, I mean, authenticity is a really funny thing. I mean, I think that authenticity, we have to almost just get out of words, even in our thinking about it, to even get to what it is. Like, did a lot of thinking about this. Like, I started a podcast, like, I don't know, over 10 years ago. And one of my really important things was, since I'm talking about, you know, inner life stuff, if you want to call it spirituality, um, human consciousness, so forth. An important thing to me was I know that people that I knew at the time, and I know certainly now, that people look at me as a teacher or a guide or something, which even 4 or 5 years ago, I'd have never have said the sentence I just said because it would have made my skin crawl. But this is another, we should almost table that for just a second and come back to it, because it's a kind of important thing. So, like, I thought, being authentic is the most important thing. And so I will be my full self on this show. I will be who I am as much as I can on the microphone when I'm talking to people. And then after a few years, and I started thinking about it, something was gnawing at me. And I was like, oh, yeah, like I'm trying to make sure I'm being myself, like I'm trying to be us. I'm making sure I'm being my full self, which means that I've drawn this little line, created this little circle of like, okay, there's who I am. There's the authentic me. I'll be that. But in being that, you're playing a role which is inauthentic.
Mhm.
And so it's the impetus, like the impulse and effort to be authentic in itself, that act is an authentic act, an inauthentic act, because you're being a character in the most subtle way, which is just really weird. It's like the second a camera is on you, you change into somebody else. You can't help it. It's like, and that's just an analogy. It's like once you start thinking about being authentic, then the thing is ruined. So this is like, in terms of what I said about, referring to myself as a teacher, or someone that people look up to, I avoided that for like a decade because I hated the idea of people looking up to me. I hated the idea of being seen as someone who knew something. I never wanted my ego, or just somehow me to, I'm a very, very, I don't know. I'll say unattached person, particularly in considering thinking about myself. There's no real concern about my ego ever taking over or doing something that would, make me be not in integrity. But still, the idea of that even being flowing through, I was like, I'll just deny that or side of it, not even receive any of that stuff. And that's how I'll deal with it. And oddly, after years and years of doing it, I started thinking about it and I thought, this is actually like, why am I so resistant to that? Why won't I even why when someone tells me, they message me or send me an email or something or DM me and they say, oh, this changed my life. Like, the thing you're talking about, it saved me. Like, or I've been following you for years and like you've been the most impactful person. I'm like, I'm teaching these people. Like, why can't I just, that this is an issue that I can't just accept that and be at peace with it and allow it to be true. And so I just did some inward looking and I'm like, oh, this is an issue. This is a problem of lovability. Like, I don't feel this. If we go even deeper, like, this is the fact that I can't accept love. I can't accept the fact that I feel worthy, that I feel lovable, that I feel like valued um, in that type of unconditional way. Obviously, that had to do with, that comes from my childhood, but like, so this is the authenticity thing where I'm like, how do I deal with this now? How do I deal with being a guy that people look at like that? And I've spent the entire time rejecting that idea, but I'm realizing that I need to embrace it. What do I do? And because it's actually authentic for me to embrace it, as opposed to authentic for me to go, "Oh, no, that's not me." Like, that seems authentic, like, "Oh, he's keeping it real." No, I'm keeping it really fake if I'm doing that. I'm denying reality. And as you mentioned earlier, I love you use one of my favorite phrases, which I use all the time, which is the true nature of reality. And, I'm like, "Oh," always my whole life's work is trying to close the gap between the story in our minds and the true nature of reality. And so, like, let's do that. So I stepped into that role and actually sent out like a newsletter thing that said, "Hey, I'm opening up availability for mentor spots because this is an important part of the work that I've been kind of denying. And so now I'll work with people one on one that want that type of work, and I'll step into that role and accept it and allow it." So authenticity is such a weird, slippery, funky thing, and I really think it's a impermanent, constant process because since we're always growing, kind of the rules of the game are always changing. We have to keep an eye on ourselves and understand where we're at. And like I kind of mentioned earlier, like letting go of some of the languaging around it and looking at like, am I allowing myself to be untethered in this way to let the fullness of who I am come out and play while continuing to be mindful in terms of being intentional and self-aware in the moment, but without intentionally trying to be a certain thing. I know that sounds complicated. It sounds like patting your head and rubbing your stomach or whatever, but it is kind of like playing a drum kit. It's, you got to get 2 feet, a foot and two hands moving in three different things. But to me, that's kind of like the process that you grow into where you live in authenticity.
Yes. I had a major shift when I was studying the headless way. Have you heard of it?
Yes, I have. God, that's an older. Um, that's from like the 70s, isn't it?
Yes, it is, but
Okay, yeah.
I interviewed the one guy who's sort of taken over, and, uh, I really lost myself in it in the best way, and actually that feels like a good phrase to use because so much of it is who are you really? And how much can you prove your own image of yourself? But, the self-portrait is what I think about all the time, where it's basically in this image that says self-portrait, it's actually an image of the room and his legs propped up, and so it's like, if that's the self-portrait, it's taking into account this idea that who you are is changing with every moment, and whatever you're taking in is actually evolving your identity in a way if you let it. And I like how you said that image of having this circle, like, no, this is who I've defined as Corey or Melissa. And I've went through that same thing for such a long period of my life when I was younger of saying like, no, I'm never changing for anybody. And I really prided myself on the fact that I show up in the same way regardless of who I'm with. And then I started to reflect on that and I was like, well, that doesn't allow me to experience the magic of activations within different energy fields. And now, what if I look at this like as curiosity, where instead of before this call, okay, I have a call with Corey Allen, I must be Melissa. Instead, it's like, ooh, I wonder what parts of myself Corey Allen's going to activate, and like what's going to
Yes.
come out in this mastermind that we have together. And allowing people, experiences to move through you instead of pushing your way through it is another just way I like to deal with it, or just sometimes the visualization can change the way I experience it. And my word of this year has been integration and really seeing what happens if I open up my energy to every experience instead of resisting or clinging.
I love that. I mean, that's beautiful. Ultimately, that's where it's at. That's where in something I note in the book is this quote from D.T. Suzuki. He was one of the early kind of Zen translators, and by that I mean for into Western language. And he has this great description of reality that or of excuse me, of enlightenment that I kind of paraphrase in there. And he says that enlightenment is allowing all of what you are to come through without getting in the way.
Mm,
And if we de-zenify that a little bit and put some more descriptors on there, it's like, can we be present and allow the impulses, the thought, the mental formations, the intuitive knowings, the responses that come up in response to what we're engaging with in that moment or who we're engaging with? Can we let that flow through without manipulating it with our intellectual processor? Can we accept and allow, yet simply guide those things that arise, no matter what they are, with a hand? And these are just my words now, but guide all that with a hand of, to keep it in Buddhist terms, wholesomeness and skillfulness. And I think that that's a really beautiful description because what it imputes is that, the critical element of enlightenment, which is recognizing that your perception is a perception. And that's ultimately the true nature of reality, is being able to see your own experience of reality. And while you see it, you engage with it on its terms, but you understand in every moment that it's truly just an illusion. It's an abstraction of what's actually occurring. And we're making a infinite amount of assumptions about people, about things, about context, about story, about what's happening. And we have a hilarious amount of cognitive bias that's going on at the same time. And although we can't access the reality underneath that, what we can do is operate with that knowledge in mind, which leads us into a life of patience, a life of openness, a life of, as you said, the very important one is curiosity and compassion and a lack of judgment. And if we can live in there, in that space, and I mean, let's be honest, we're not going to live in there all the time, but as much as we can live in that space, I mean, to me, like what you were describing, that seems to be the stop. you know, that's that's where we want to get off the train and just kind of live there for a little while because that's the place of being conscious, being present, being aware, but still being engaged.
You talk about redefining oneself often. How do you balance the concept of awareness and just allowing and being open, allowing your personality to just be in the presence of something else with this idea of redefining yourself? Like, what does that process look like? Do you sit down every 6 months and it's like, who have I become now?"
I mean, every 6 seconds, that's what I'm doing. Honestly. There's this won't make any sense, but I'm gonna share it anyway. There's this little painting a friend sent me of, that this person made of a cartoon, kind of a comic book, but it's like a frog laying in bed at night with a one little lamp on, and it's just looking out the window, and it just says he looks kind of shocked and, like, existential, and he's just saying, "Man," that's pretty much how I feel all the time. Yeah, like, so yeah, this is a great question, and by the way, I'm having so much fun. I just wanna say this is such a fun conversation. Thank you for having it and being who you are in it because it's really what I enjoy talking about. And I feel like that in the way that a lot of the culture has shifted, that people's attentions have shifted, that we could call it the kind of um, the social media dharma that flows around, how that's all changed. There's just not a lot of opportunities for conversations like this, and I really love them. So I just want to put that there for now and just
Me too.
communicate that. Yeah. So to answer your question, I consider impermanence pretty much 24/7. I'm always paying attention to the impermanence of life, of myself, like my body, of my mind, of my consciousness, and my identity. And what happens is that we can get attached to certain stories about all of the cosmic wind I was just describing that's blowing through us all the time. We can get attached to certain parts of that story and cling to it, like sometimes for dear life. Like some things, interestingly, we hold on to for a long time without realizing it. Some things we hold on to and we do realize it. Generally, it's for a sense of comfort, for a sense of individuality, for a sense of purpose, for a sense of grounding, even if it's in something bad. Because this is a weird one. It's like people will stay attached to things that are bad for them because it's more comfortable for them to be grounded and miserable than untethered and free and a sense of openness and kind of freedom. So I make sure that the stories I tell myself about who I am, about what I've experienced, about where I'm going, about what's happening right now in this present moment, that I don't cling to them. And sometimes if I notice that I am clinging to one, that's where I will look at it and I will intentionally let it go. And the redefining yourself is kind of taking stock of all of that. Of being like, okay, who have I been? And who am I sort of getting comfortable with being? And is it serving me? And am I doing that because am I continuing living in this way and being this person because it's what feels right to me and it's what's making me happy? Or is it because it's what I'm comfortable with? Or is it because it's what the people around me are comfortable with? I mean, that's a huge one that we never even realize. I mean, I had this funny insight one time where I realized that life is like this. I should say, to have more context, like how much our social containers hold us hostage, and they impose and force a lot of our identity upon us without us realizing. We do it to other people too, and it's not a malicious thing. It just happens because, again, we're looking for familiarity, and like we want to be grounded with the knowing that, like, whenever you talk to your friend, your best friend, you know what you're going to deal with, and you have this set of experiences and so forth, and resonances, and there's no surprises. And it's like life, our social container becomes like this sitcom where everyone has their scripts. And if you go off script, the other actors in the sitcom freak out because they're like, oh God, now my lines are invalid. And who is this person? They're not being the right character. And everyone freaks out. So there's all this pressure in our lives to continue being who we are, or else all the other actors in our ecosystem will start, you know, storming off stage and freaking out. So it's just a matter of like paying attention to those things and knowing that they're not permanent and you don't have to be or do any of the things that you have up until this point. And I think that type of kind of internal auditing is just really valuable because like we're always changing so much. Like, obviously, nature is always changing, life is always changing, everything is always changing. And it's like if we can just sit back and just quickly look and go, do I still want to be this person? Do I still want to be that person? Do I still want to keep doing this? Like, why am I doing this? Let's just take stock and let's make some changes. I think is really useful because it keeps us from just believing this story, about who we have to be. Because if we keep doing it, the longer we do it, the more normalized it becomes and the harder it becomes to see. And so if it's not something that's a good thing for us, then that can be really not, I'm not damaging, but it can be really limiting over time.
Yeah, I love the phrasing you use in your book about tending to our inner landscape. And I sat with that for a while because so often we're talking about inner work and it doesn't sound fun. It's like you're doing the work and sometimes it's not, but at the same time, you create beauty from that, and that's what I loved about landscape is because a lot of times landscaping your yard is not necessary, but does it change your experience? Completely.
Yeah.
and it is work, but you're making a beautiful hedge or whatever it is, and so it's like leisure meets luxury meets necessity all at once, and that's totally what that inner landscape feels like to me. I was just talking to a friend about, um, actually a similar thing to how you mentioned about not feeling loved. This week, our family dealt with something, and it was just a really hard week for me, and I was crying in a parking lot, and I reached out to my one bestie that lives in Austin, and I and she's just like, "Melissa, you are so loved," and it was like that moment where I was so thankful for her to say that and for me to have this experience with it because it wasn't like my experience was, "No, I'm not," like, arguing against it, but I noticed that I had resistance, and I noticed that I was the observer of this resistance, and I just wrote, it's so funny that you say, "I'm so loved." I can feel that I'm not receiving it, and
Mhm.
then I kind of had my own little pity party because I was crying, but I was like, "I actually don't think I feel very loved. I do by a select few, but I think I live more in a space of feeling misunderstood." And so with that, I went into a meditation and I was like, "What is in that realization for me?" And I was just sitting there, like, half pity partying, half observing, and then it was so aligned with this conversation where I was just like, what a beautiful thing to be misunderstood. You don't have anyone chaining you to who they think you are because everyone's
Mm.
perceiving you in a different way. No one's projecting this one idea that you've built up over time. You get to be an enigma and you get to choose in any moment. And I
Yes.
love that. And it completely shifted my perspective of like six of the things that I was going through, and it allowed me to be in this space of my word of the year, integration, and just like being open to see who evolves without my idea or anyone else's.
I love that. That's so great. And, there's something you were talking about that I think it was kind of a beautiful distinction that just reading between the words of what you were saying is the difference between like, or I suppose maybe even the contradiction of like, we can be loved but not feel loved. And that's something that people don't generally talk about, you know?
When you noticed that, you immediately leaned into it and were like, how do I open up to receive this, to dance with some of the people out there with these mentorships? Do you do that most often when you notice something that you're working on? Do you just kind of go face first into changing it? Or what's your process for seeing that and deciding, okay, well, if that's how it's been, I don't want to be that. What can I do to become more?
I will say that um that skill, I suppose it's a cultivated skill, but it's really like I'll to like quoting some of my long-term friends I've known for like 20 years, they would say it's like my superpower is when I have an insight, it's like I flip a switch and I just continue going. It's like, all right, new program is running. And I look at that, it's complicated. But to simplify it, let's simplify it. I would say it's a combination of spending most of my life thinking about non-attachment and impermanence. And but oddly, even whenever I was younger, I had this. Like, for example, whenever I was, a teenager, I was playing in bands and like touring everywhere and playing big shows and stuff like that. And one day, I just decided that there's a lot of potential, a lot of people involved, and one day the puzzle sort of was completed in my mind that that was no longer the thing I needed to do. And I was like, okay, everyone, I'm done. I'm going to sell all of my equipment and go do something else. And everyone was like, what? You're like, this, this was, like I said, as a teenager, it was like one of these things where I had people that would care, like I would show up to play a gig and someone would like meet me at the van or whatever and like ask if they could please carry my guitar for me into the venue because they were like, and they would want me to like show them lessons and stuff backstage if I just like that was kind of where the energy was at. So I had this interesting level of status and stuff already at that time in the uh, in bands, and they were like, "How could you walk away from this?" It's like it just doesn't. It's not what I'm interested in anymore. And they're like, "But you were yesterday." And it's like, "Yeah, but I don't know. I've thought about some things since then, and now it's today, and I need to move on." But it's just time and time again. That's kind of how I am with things, and I suppose it's very it's kind of a high logic, low emotion in some ways approach to things. I think that that comes from some, like I said, a lot of study of those ideas, a lot of sitting with those ideas, a lot of integrating with those ideas with non-attachment and kind of the illusion of like that we must cling to our identity or our ways of being or so forth. And also part of it, I think, is due to just childhood experience of needing to be hyper independent and out of kind of necessity, needing to stay non attached to certain experiences so that I could protect myself and stay sharp and stay dynamic in the environment. So yeah, that's the process is just me having an insight and then going, okay, well, we'll do that now and then moving forward. But I can kind of be like that with the inverse of that, where, or maybe it's an extension of that, like things that I don't even like. I'm the type of person that will, I just wear like kind of the same thing every day. I just wear like a black shirt and like black pants every day. I eat the same lunch like every day. I drink the same, I have the exact same breakfast, like, and thing every morning. I have the same routine. It's like these things that are generally that need a lot of attention and variety I'm just not attached to those things either.
It saves a lot of time.
Yes.
I'm actually sort of the same. I need to figure out what you're eating for lunch because I have not drilled down something I want every day, but breakfast is always the same. But I think for me, I've asked myself that question of in what areas is variety important to me? And in what areas can I just drill down, at least for now? And I know myself where I just have to mix things up in order for it to stay spicy for me. But
Right.
I have a ton of routines. And what that looks like for me, though, is I'll have a routine that I am solid with for like 7 weeks. And then one day I'm like, oh, that doesn't feel good anymore. How can I revise this? But it's like, it'll be similar. Like, an example I recently gave is my types of meditations. Like I'll be really set on like a mantra meditation, and then all of a sudden I'll only want to meditate uh, to guided, which is rare. I actually just got back into guided a couple months ago after like 3 years of not wanting guided at all, and did that. Got really into the Silva meditation for a while, and so it's like the little things where I'm like, how do I want to grow, but how do I keep this in with my non-negotiables? My non-negotiable is meditation, but I want to explore different types. My non-negotiable is spirituality, but I want to see how people are doing it all over the world and find the through lines. My non-negotiable is movement, but this month I really like the Peloton. Last month it was yoga. And so
Mhm.
it's like, how can I keep the routines broad to allow for the variety within them? But then, yes, I eat eggs every single morning, exactly the same.
Yeah. No, that's really smart. I like the way that you frame that. That's really cool. Yeah, having this a structure of things that you need, but then figuring out how to keep them fresh. Yeah, that's cool. I mean, my approach is it's sort of maybe even the inverse of that, where like I was at this like social gathering thing, people were hanging out, and someone that I know, like an acquaintance, asked me like, "What's your favorite burger in Austin?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't have one," And he was like, "Oh, that's you don't have one? You don't have one that you just like love and that you want to go?" I was like, "No." And he's like, "Well, that's just really sad." That's like that you don't have a favorite. And I was like, I think you're misunderstanding, or maybe I'm not explaining it right. Like, it's that every burger I eat is my favorite burger.
Yes.
It's like, like the saying goes, "A person with no preference is truly free." It's like, if you are open enough, you could eat a single raisin and have your mind blown to bits. So a burger, any burger, whether it's what you were anticipating or what your expectations were or not, and there will be some, of course, that are more physiologically reactive than others, but they're all incredible. And I think that's kind of the consistent thing with like eating the same lunch every day. It's like, well, it's not the same day. It's a whole different day. I'm thinking of completely different things. There's variance in this thing that I'm eating because like my perception of it is different in the moment. And yeah, I just am aware and I kind of like just enjoy that the play of like extreme presence and ultimately like if you poke a hole in presence enough, what you get to is infinity. Like that's what's beneath it. And if you're looking at things from an infinite perspective, then everything becomes infinite.
It's so funny that you use that burger example. I was just talking to somebody about this, and it was because my mom had mentioned something about going to Croatia, and I was like, "I love Croatia," and she's like, "Well, I spoke to Susie, and Susie said Croatia was so much better 20 years ago," and I was like, "Well, I'm not gonna let somebody else's comparison affect how I experience Croatia now. It was wonderful for me," you know? And, it it opened up this whole discussion about food, and I was just like, it's like the best thing that you could do is go to a new restaurant and have it be a whole new experience like it's your very first restaurant. Otherwise, you are by nature bringing in judgment to this burger bite. Like
Absolutely.
judgment and hierarchy, and you're dampening your own experience because it's slightly not as good as that last one versus what's in this burger for me today? This is exactly the burger that I should be eating. How can I experience this from a place of total purity?
100%. Yeah, yeah, and it's amazing that we do that with people. Everyone does that with people. It's like imagine this is one not to be a self quoter here, but like one of the things I've written somewhere or the other or another is imagine if we could go a day speaking to people instead of our idea of them.
Mm,
It's like we do just what you said about that burger to people. It's where we're like, I know what this person's like. I know how they're going to be. I know what they're going to say. I know what the situation is. I'll shave down who they are, ultimately in my mind and access them on this tiny little thing. But it's like if you open up like you do with a burger, with a person, like so much is in there and so much can flow through, and like a person can feel that openness and that spaciousness that you create, and then it gives them the safety and the trust to then be vulnerable within themselves and share aspects of self that they may not feel like they're able to in the as I said earlier, like in the sitcom of their lives, and it's a beautiful way to experience people. I'm curious, like something that you said earlier that if you don't want to talk about it, we certainly don't have to. It'd be funny if I said we have to talk about this and you have no choice. You were talking earlier about like this moment in your car and how you felt like, what did you say? Not known,
misunderstood.
misunderstood. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's so interesting to me. How do you could you say more about that? Like, just the misunderstood part?
I feel as though some of my formative relationships had expectations of who they wanted me to become. And because I stepped away from certain things, especially religion, there's just this constant, it feels like disappointment. But at the same time, I don't feel seen or understood in that one. And it ends up reflecting in a lot of others. I just, I have a lot of depth that I like to go into. And it feels like oftentimes for most people, it's a phrase I've heard just throughout my whole life from the time I was like 5 is too much. And so because I feel like too much, I spent years making myself smaller or trying to be who I thought people wanted me to be. And then there came a point where I refused to do that. And because of that, there has been so much joy in actually expressing myself. and following my interests despite what the container that I feel like some people want me in or can perceive, I guess. But yeah, it's just this I've always felt like I'm like in a little glass jar. I've felt that my whole life. Like that I remember thinking that as a child, like I was just sitting in this glass jar in the middle of a room. Do people see me? And
Mm.
it's just and it manifests in different ways and in a lot of I think the work I've moved into the last like 5 years has been Byron Katie really helped me reframe this and see where I was doing that to other people because I expected them not to be able to handle me or take in the full spectrum of me. And so I think it's just it's part of my work, like the thing that's always with me, this loneliness, this misunderstanding and seeing it in different ways and realizing so often it's nobody's fault. Not that it ever would be, but it's so often it's just projected by me. But like I said, it's something I'm still working with. I haven't fully found healing with it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, thank you for sharing that. That's I too am in the I'll be honest, I'm just sniffing something right now. This is why I'm opening this up for us. You know, I also feel similarly, but in a different way, in terms of when you mentioned going deep into things, it's definitely not what the a person generally looks for. It's not what someone's generally interested in. I think maybe like yourself, like I'm fascinated by the incredibly rich, endless nuance of being and of ideas and of mind and of like experience or just of everything. It's like if I could, if I get interested in making pasta, I would then learn everything I possibly could about it to the last atom. And then I want to talk about it in a very rich way with someone because it's if you can be present with just how like immaculate the idea that you can turn like a piece of wheat and a like this this weird white orb that comes out of a dinosaur basically like a mini dinosaur, you mix those two things together, crack an egg, and put this wheat powder together and then boil it in water. It's like, what is water? It's like, it's so strange. It's like molecules struck together that like we're made of it. It's like this, but you heat it up and it turns into this flowing, boiling, bubbling thing. Like air moves through it quickly because of heat, like because it excites the cell. Like it's just a bizarre process. And if you can just consider and live in there for a minute, it's like it's complete like bedazzlement, it's incredible. But it's like people aren't trying to understand or sit with those things because they have kind of a script in their mind that they're like, oh, that's boring or interesting or whatever, or they can't they don't comprehend in the same way, and so it's not really like it sounds like white noise to them. I think that's probably generally what the case is more often. I will say that I have a friend who who's similar, but I'm worse than he is with that type of thing. But one of the things he says that I love that, it makes me feel seen is that I'll start saying something and then I'll be like, oh, well, you know, I don't want to go too deep into it. He's like, no, 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 let's take the scenic route. Let's get like I know you could get to the point now, but let's take 8 minutes to get there instead of 30 seconds. It'll be fun. I'm like, okay, thank you. All right, let's take the scenic route. So I love that. But I'm curious, like in terms of when you talk about, feeling misunderstood and those experiences you had, did you like what is your level of kind of self-sufficiency and independence been like in your life? Has that been a kind of a core thing for you?
Yeah, for sure. I was an only child of divorced parents. And
Okay.
so and they didn't have a great relationship and so I just I felt alone a lot and then my mom married my stepdad and I got 2 stepbrothers sort of, but it was a really rough transition. My stepdad's still my stepdad, very loving and all that, but my mom was religious and found it for some reason important to really share with me the hierarchy of the family when we joined with them of, God comes first, our marriage comes second, and then the kids come last. I recently unpacked this with her and um She says she remembers that moment and almost feeling a little cocky, so I don't know if she was trying to, like, prove a point to me or something,
Mm.
but it's something that really I remember that was like a moment of feeling severed. Like it was me and my mom against the world at that time. Like me and my mom moving to this new house, me and my mom living with my grandparents, me and my mom, like she was my person. And then now I came third, not even second. So I just that for that I just felt like I was on my own from that moment and then exactly like what you described too of feeling like having this need to go deeper. It's just it was that combined with always trying to explore different thoughts and being in a very closed-minded family. No, that's blasphemy. No, you can't go there. And so it was just like throwing a ball with no one to catch it all the time. And that feeling of like excitement and then steam being let out is just so familiar to me. Like, oh, is somebody going to catch this one? Can I talk about that? Oh, and it just being dismissed or almost mocked. And yeah, so I just learned to play catch by myself, I guess.
Yeah, this is incredible. Like, I know exactly, what you're I well, I don't wanna say I know exactly what you're feeling, but I have a very similar experience on a f I think on a fundamental level, not necessarily a literal level. And so that's why I wanted to explore this because I thought about this and I came to an interesting realization I just wanna share. So, similarly, I didn't have the, God, marriage, kids sort of thing. But what I did have was the same, I'm sorry you went through it, but I was glad to hear you say this because it was just sort of incredible, just the similarities. I had the same experience, which I actually had to track back through a lot of deep meditation and like looking inward. And I found this like space of why am I always so like, there's like a physical nature in my stomach that is always very protective. Like I'm always kind of on guard in a weird way. Even though I'm relaxed, I'm still, you know, my street smarts almost, you want to call it, are always like up to 10 on an emotional level. And that's, of course, just because of, my childhood. But I was looking at this moment. I was like, what let's look deeply into this first moment and really see if I can find where this started. And it was whenever I, as a little kid, expressed an emotion. And it was like the first kind of time my mind was online and I expressed an emotion. And I should say for people under 40 listening to this, I mean online in terms of I was conscious and aware, not on the internet. And then I expressed this emotion and it was met with fear and anger and threats. And so the person who was supposed to be protecting me and to be safe and to be a space of unconditional love. Instead, there was a sense of betrayal. And it was just like exactly what you said. It's like the exact same experience of being like, I thought you had my back. I thought this was, this was the situation. I thought you were going to take care of me. And it was like, no, not only am I not going to take care of you, but you need to be scared of me and watch out and not express yourself, you're not allowed to feel out loud. You're not allowed to feel things. And also you're on your own, buddy. Like I'm not going to show you anything either. So it's a deep sense of betrayal and feeling alone. And that's the aloneness, what I found. And I'm just curious if I'm just kind of, forgive me for weaving our experiences together, but I
I
just think
love
it
it.
could be fruitful to talk about them. So for me, I looked at that and I thought, well, what has happened? Because I was a very curious, very like just sweet kid that lived in his imagination and very soft and gentle. And what happened is that as I grew, I became incredibly firm and confident and strong and like kind of this will forged out of iron, like this relentless, I mean, I'll just say it like powerful type of person and presence, right? And also I'm 6'3" and I'm a big bald guy with a deep voice. And so it's like, well, that was forged. That's not who I am. That's who I became. Right? And so it's like, and so why did I become that? And it's because of like those one of those like foundational experiences. And that experience I found rhymed with the reason of why my emotional invulnerability was so high. Such a hard time accessing emotions and making my real self l- open to other people. And it's the betrayal and a combination with needing to be extremely hyper independent, self sufficient, because you have to always be in the mindset of figuring it out. And if you're in the mindset of figuring it out, then you don't make yourself, your weaknesses accessible. Because if you do, then you're not figuring it out. You're asking someone else to help you, or you're showing someone else an inward path to where they can be there for you. And that's, quote unquote, not trustworthy. And what happened, I realized, is that I created this whole thing where, or I should say, it emerged where I was very, very emotionally disconnected. I became extremely reliant on my intellect, on being independent, on being anti system, on being rebellious, on being, really throwing out any sense of anything that could control me. And then on top of it, I leveraged my humor and creativity and my intelligence to be funny and interesting and different and kind of charismatic in person. And then my size and kind of how I look as a person completed that to where then in life, moving through life, I'm this guy that like looks a little bit different, that is big, is very like stoic, like a piece of like a marble statue came to life, but is very calm and deep, and will have these conversations and use that gift of having to look deeply with emotional and philosophical intelligence because it was a protection mechanism, using that to look into people to have conversations that really enrich and enliven their experience in the present moment and become very meaningful because they're able to talk about things that they've never considered. They have insights, they're able to share things and get into deep conversations with me that they've never had with other people before. And they'll leave going, wow, this was amazing. Like, I thank you so much for this conversation. And I used to think, what a great thing. Until one day I realized what you said was, wow, how isolated have I made myself? You know?
Yeah.
It's like a protection mechanism. It's wild, and I just assume you must have the same thing because everything you were saying tracked.
Yeah, it sounded like you were telling my story. And what I've realized recently, well, this has been kind of an ongoing unfolding, but I realized that there's a shadow and a gift in everything. And sometimes it's as quick as that flip of a switch on how you experience it. But also, in order to fully integrate, you have to consider both sides and find that middle. Like you said, how great is this that I'm able to give this gift to people or whatever. And that's also true, along with the isolation. If that is also true for you, then it's like, okay, well, what does it look like? And I'm still looking for the answer to this, so I don't have it. But what does it look like to be able to give that gift and receive it in the same moment? And maybe that wouldn't feel as isolating. For me, I think I have really had to notice which of my relationships I can have conversations like this one because I need this in my life to feel connected to other people. I I think I explore this to feel connected to everything, but it's ironic how it often increases the distance between me and other people because I feel like I'm in the deep end and they won't come in with me. And so, but at the same time, I try to be very careful about not accidentally painting the gift with only shadow. Like it just has to be both for it to be multidimensional, you know? And I've taught since I've noticed this, I've noticed so many people experiencing the same thing. I was just coaching someone who felt as though um, she was manipulating people because she would become something, become what they need, see what their needs were, and be too attentive. And while that might be true, at the same time, there's such a gift in being able to penetrate what's just on the surface and see deeper. So, how can we come together with both of those things and experience it in its totality without it isolating us, without like, because it's never just one or the other. And oftentimes it's what we choose it to be. But we do also have to have the openness to really see, okay, well, where is the shadow in this? Can there still be healing? Where can there be a deeper experience?
Yeah, and that's a beautiful perspective, and you really, it's so true what you said about not throwing the baby out with the bathwater and realizing like it is a gift born out of, suffering and necessity, but it's look at what it's become. It's a beautiful power, Like I was talking with a friend of mine the other day, and I say, I was mentioning, he was asking me about the book stuff was going on. I was like, it's great, and he's like, how's it feeling? How's it landing? I was like, it's good. I'm trying to do my best to like receive the loves I'm getting from it. And he was like, oh yeah, I know, I got that problem too. And then my line was like, yeah, I mean, but he's an incredible person, but I was like, yeah, broken toys usually have pretty cool features, um, so that's kind of like one of the things. But to me, like the way I worked with it was just I'm very analytical and very much like put myself in the lab. And so I started assessing like how am I holding myself in life? And I walk around feeling very strong and very confident and like I said, like kind of made out of marble and fearless. And I just feel like my mind is like this razor sharp kind of it's a loving one, but it's like the edge of a sword, kind of walking through life. And I thought, let's play with this and let's see if I can find what the opposite of that would be like. Cause I need to just figure out where the edges are. And I'm like, I'm living in maximum what they would call like industrial state of psychology of like hyper logic and functional organizational like and power, that type. And I mean that, and again, I don't mean power in terms of manipulation, but in terms of confidence, self-reliance, self-belief, presence, awareness, all of those things. And I thought, how can I, instead of being in that control, because that's really what it is. It's control. Even those conversations that you and I might have with some people sometimes, that's a way to control the situation because we're going really deep into something. And although it's fascinating to us, it's creating a specific container that we have authority in, that we're able to speak in. And it deeply puts the focus off of any place in us that might be vulnerable. And again, sorry, I don't mean to speak on your behalf, but I'm just kind of sharing the experiences. It drops it way into this other world, kind of this almost a fantasy world of what we get to talk about. And it keeps it off something real that's actually might trouble us or make us feel accessible or vulnerable. So it's an interesting thing, that control element to it. It's like, oh, I'm isolated, but I'm controlling the isolation. Like, what is this? And so, so I thought, well, let me try and walk through life the other way, like an open wound. Like, let me just let go physically of all of that kind of power that I feel myself walking on in life with. Let me not logicize everything. Let me just tap into a felt sense of experience as much as I can and be that without putting on the Iron Man costume to go into life. And I did it at an intentional time where I was brought out by some beautiful people to Scottsdale to give a talk, a keynote, and it was being held in this massive, I don't know, casino that has is one of these like resorts places that has kind of everything in there. What's funny about it is that there's gambling, there's golf, there's kind of concerts, there's all this type of stuff. None of those things are interesting to me. And so I'm like walking in this giant space where everyone is like enamored, but I'm not. And I'm just sort of like, how am I gonna kill some time? But I thought this is the perfect place because look at all these people. They're like in maximum delusion and sort of like it's like Hunter S. Thompson. It's like they're it's like whenever he's on like 50 hits of acid in the Vegas casino, and he's like, "Oh my god, look at these people," and they're like lizards and like just the weirdest like bad trip vibes. That's what those places kind of look like to me, and I was like, okay, this is a place to like take off my like slide from control, being the one in the power position to being this open because it's such weird and this is just kind of like the crucible. And so I let go consciously of all that stuff. I was like walking around in there and just being susceptible to all the energies. And I was just like, this is awful. And this is like, and I think this is how most people feel most of the time. And this is terrible. I would hate to be like this. But now I know what it feels like to be on the other end of the spectrum. It was scary and it felt painful and it felt confusing and it felt weird and it felt chaotic and like there was no direction. Um, Very odd. And so after experimenting with that, then I thought, okay, what I need to do is, of course, um, my natural sense of self is this. But as you said, and I love you use this phrase, which I I use, which I've never heard anyone else use, being a full spectrum human. Like that's so cool that you use that because I that's how I describe this experience. That's like what we're going towards here. And it's like you have this highly developed, acutely unique aspect of identity and self in mind that is unusual. However, in the creation of that, there's another piece because of the laws of nature of like the dynamic of something that like to for something to be that strong, there's another element that is atrophied, that has paid the price for the strength of that other thing. So let's find out what that thing is and nurture it so that we can become kind of full spectrum. And so for me, it was like, let me play with taking off the power suit a little bit and opening up that just a little bit. Now that I know what it feels like, let me open up that spaciousness of vulnerability and create some space for that. And after some practicing with that in like various situations, I got to where it's kind of like breathing or something. It's like, let's turn the volume down on the intensity of the other guy, of like the Hulk or whatever, and just relax and allow spaces and moments to flow through where you're taking a breath in. And in that breath, it's almost as though the opening for vulnerability expands and you allow it to be there. And then when you breathe out, you also allow it to kind of close again because it's like you still need to feel safe. But in this gentle opening of the vulnerability to others, people who you feel trustworthy to share that with, you can build the confidence to allow that to be more seen more regularly. And over time, there becomes a balance to where you can still be the strong, brilliant and highly interested person that you are, Melissa, while also allowing the spaciousness of that vulnerable self to be open enough to where it can have communication with the outside world. Because what's happening, I think, or I'll just put on myself, what's happened for me is it's like in the space of like, if we want to feel connection, it's like you don't want to feel isolated, you don't want to feel misunderstood. Well, by not being vulnerable, I am the one perpetuating that. And so if I don't want to feel isolated, then I need to not be I need to not isolate myself. I need to allow the chance for tenderness. And in that tenderness, I understand there may be some type of emotion or pain that I can't control. And I'll feel things perhaps that I might not want to feel. And the most, I think, just being honest, probably the scariest thing for me would be is people seeing me in a way that I didn't want them to.
I resonate with a lot of that. And I get this visual of, because I know that feeling of like, I'm so analytical and I'm in my mind a lot, but I realize the weight of that. Like, even from my internal perspective, when I'm like picturing being in this suit, it's like all the attention and focus is up here. And what I've been working on is bringing that focus down to the heart, when you were when you were describing that experience of walking through the chaos and you're like, "Oh, this feels vulnerable." That is exactly how I feel when I take mushrooms in the wrong environment.
Right.
Like, it's like I'm feeling swayed in every direction. But what I've been trying to tune into, and it's something I mentioned before of like really allowing myself to open and be changed by every experience and every encounter and not pushing my personality, just being and opening. And I feel like there's a shift when you really focus in the heart space because I feel like while the heart is vulnerable, it's also strong and life giving. And I feel like it has its own filter beyond what my mushroom in the wrong environment filter would be, where it's just taking in everything. It's still kind of accidentally making meaning. It's taking other people's meaning, but instead it's like a filter. I almost picture it filtering out the impurities.
Yeah.
If I can look at every experience and person and encounter as nutrients, it's just a good visualization for myself where it's like when we're eating food, we take what we need and we leave the rest. And so often I think that's why we are so adamant about our personality or our expectations for this moment and we're pushing. But when we just trust that like, okay, just because I'm open and I'm allowing and I'm letting them lead the conversation and I'm just being here absorbing this person's view, whatever it is, it's like just because I'm here and I'm open to it doesn't mean I have to take anything that doesn't serve me.
Mhm.
And I just had an experience of this. I was having my hard day and um I'm very open to people's spirituality because of how things were sort of pushed on me. Like I really want people to feel spiritually seen. And so I know that my parents have a religion and I really try to meet them where they are. Like when my mom is going through a hard time, I'm like, "Can I pray with you?" And I pray also. My view of what it is, its spiritual focus is more open than I think hers is, than I know hers is, but um I tried to let her be there for me in that moment, and I was like, "Yeah, pray with me." And then at the end, it spiraled into a, "Well, these are the moments where you come to Jesus and blah, blah, blah." And it was like, I could feel myself closing back down because I'm like, I
Mhm.
opened too much. I want to be open to your gifts and where your spirit lies and where you feel am strengthened. And I want you to be able to gift that to me because I know that's also a gift to you. And also, can you do that without an agenda of like thinking, "Oh, she's weak right now, let's convert her." Like I can't that's happened to me twice, once with my neighbor and my mom all in the same week, and I was just like, "Oh gosh." And so it's something I'm still learning of like, because then right there I closed up and then I wanted to speak my mind and give a lecture on what it really means to be there for somebody, and then we were back in this like ego dance.
Mhm. Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah,
I don't
that's
know where I was
amazing.
really going with that, but it was just my experience
Yeah.
of learning and being and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. But I think I think I'm given that gift though. And so are you with the nature of what we are doing in the world. I think I needed to understand what it feels like to be put in a box. And I know that I'm a voice for people in that situation. I know that I'm a voice for people with a lot of the things that I've gone through and really trusting that all of those things were just meant for the outcome were and I think that's the how can I see the hardship as a gift in the moment and not have any expectations about what that is too so that I can get all of their milk or seep out every single part of that gift instead of just what I want it to be or I hope it to be or I think it's going to be. But that's the challenge too, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a beautiful perspective. I mean, I think that's how it's the only way you can like, it's how you carry on without falling into the darkness that that type of experience can lead you into. Like, that probably should, hypothetically, just mathematically speaking, lead you into, seeing it like that. Yeah. I mean, I share that too. I mean, a lot of my closer friends that I've known for the majority of my life, or 20 years or so, they're like, they've asked me on various occasions, like, how are you not like a drug addict or like just, some just like, cause, I've shared them some intimate experiences and things I've been through and whatnot. It's like, man, I generally tell them that, what you just said. It's like, I'm grateful for everything. I mean, there's a general sadness inside always, but I'm grateful for, you know, I'm grateful for uh for it all. And even that, honestly, that even that sadness is a lesson. It's like the lesson of things can just suck. Things that happen in life can just be sad. It's okay. It's a lesson of acceptance. It's a lesson of reality. And then it's a lesson of like non-attachment and actionability, where it's like, well, this is sad, you know, and it will feel that way forever, probably, but that's okay. It's like that's a part of just being alive, right? And what can we then do with that? That's how I look at it. What can we do with that? Can we allow it and just see it for what it is, not try and change it, because then we're just grasping again, and then just try and turn it more, more poison into more medicine.
And even what is sadness without all of the connotations that we've built into it?
Mhm.
How often has sadness moved you in the direction that enlivens you because now you know its opposite? And so I feel like I could talk to you for 24 full hours. So if you wanna schedule that, let's do it. But, I wanna respect your time, and so, we've covered so much. If you were gonna leave listeners with one thing to focus on, to work with this week, what would that be?
Oh, yes. Let's see. I would say a good thing would be, in any moment you're feeling resistance, or you're thinking something negative about yourself, or you find yourself assuming what something is going to be like before you experience it, pause and recognize that what you're thinking is simply an assumption about reality, an assumption about yourself, an assumption about how things should or could be. And then try, after recognizing that, allowing yourself to let that go, come to the present, and then experience yourself or your life with a level of openness and curiosity and wonder, and watch how much possibility, how much everything, joy and beauty and presence is really available in every moment of your experience, if you allow yourself to be open enough.
Well, thank you so much for my favorite conversation of the year so far. These are the compliments that
Amazing.
fuel me. So for listeners that haven't read your book, that wanna connect with that and your podcast, where's the best place for them to find all of your goodies?
Oh, yes. You can go to Cory-Allen.com. There's a lot of information there. Of course, on all the social media things, I am Hey Cory Allen. And yeah, the book is, of course, on Amazon, and it's all where all good bookstores are selling it as well. So you can go out into the analog world and check it out there at your local bookstore.
All the links for this episode will be at mindlove.com/361. Your challenge for this week is a thought experiment to get really intimate with your assumptions. which is almost any time you're feeling unhappy about a situation. It comes down to assumptions or expectations about how it should be. When you're baffled by someone else, it's because you're assuming they should be different. But what if instead you can flip that to curiosity? Instead of this should be this way, ask yourself, I wonder how it became this way. I wonder what's going to happen next now that it's unfolding differently than my expectations thought it should. There's all sorts of ways that you can challenge your assumptions, challenge your current state of mind, even challenge your mood. So play with it. I have always talked about my Rolodex of mindsets that I've internally rebranded as my Tinder of mindsets because it just makes more sense now. Does anyone even have a Rolodex? They take up so much desk space and they're not cute. Anyways, Tinder of mindsets, just swiping through different ways to look at something until something feels good. Because isn't that the goal anyways? If you can get this moment to feel good, then you're more likely to take a more empowered action for the next step, for the next moment. You're more likely to create your next moment instead of just reacting to the previous moment over and over and over again until your life is gone and you never fully stepped into your power. We have a lot of amazing things coming up, including a retreat and our final round of soul strength activation for the year. This is going to be so powerful. I've actually been creating loads of more resources for those people that are finally ready to do the damn thing that they've been putting off for years. And this isn't just about setting a goal at all. This is about becoming the type of person who has the capacity for any goal that you can dream of. Not only that, also expanding your ability to dream so that you dream bigger than you do at this very moment and you fully believe it's possible. And because of that belief, that is the life that you create. That is what I'm promising you with Soul Strength Activation. So if that sounds like you, if you're ready to be a changed person in just 3 months' time, head to mindlove.com/SSA to read more about it, or just send me a DM and we'll hop on a call and talk about if it's right for you. The Mind Love Retreat is at the end of September. This is going to be absolutely incredible, and we only have one room left. It's still actually one of the best rooms in the entire mansion. It's one of the master bedrooms. So if you are looking for a luxury getaway where you are motivated and given all of the tools to live your absolute best self for a week so that you can come home a changed person, look at me. I'm offering you 2 different avenues of total transformation. Find out more at mindlove.com/retreat. And that's all for today. So thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.